Let's take a moment and discuss the while loop. The while loop. So the while loop is not generally going to be your counter loop. It can be, but most of the time the while loop is for when we know this loop is going to repeat an unspecified number of times. In general programming terms, we like to call these user control loops. So you have a counter control and you have a user control. So when the user controls it, it's up to them when they want to stop the loop. So let's talk about this example. And I've already keyed the example, but we're going to go over some of the parts of the loop that you have to understand. So this loop's purpose is to get a number from the user. So I'm going to keep getting numbers from the user. And as I'm getting these numbers, I want to accumulate them, meaning I want to keep up with the sum, okay, or the total. So let's kind of walk through how this program is set up. So I have sum equals 0.0. Okay, that's obviously a variable I'm going to use in the program, and that's kind of like a variable declaration. I'm just giving that variable an initial value. And my first line of code is just my input statement, asking the user for the number. Okay, number is also my loop control variable because the value of number determines whether or not my loop is going to repeat. So we would call that the loop control variable. So while the number is not -1, while the number is not -1, while this is true, these statements are going to repeat. So we're going to say sum equals sum plus number. Let's talk about that. This is an accumulator in programming. So when the program is first executed, sum is equal to 0. So this is like saying 0 equals 0 plus whatever number you put in. Let's say you put in 10. So 0 equals 0 plus 10. Now the value of sum is 10. Okay? Then I ask for the input again, because again, the program is going to just keep asking the user to enter a number. Every time the user puts in a number, we're going to add it to the value of sum. Okay? So in order for this loop to in order for us to update the loop control variable or the value of number, then we have to ask for it again. So we say number, input, enter the number. So let's say this time we put in 10. It comes back here while the number is not -1. So 10 is not -1. So we go through these two statements again. Okay? And this loop is going to continue to repeat, asking you for the number, adding the number to sum, getting a new number, until the user puts in a -1. This is called our centennial value or trailer value. Different textbooks, different programming languages call it different stuff. So this is the value that would stop my loop. Okay, this is the value that would stop the loop. And in this respect, it's -1. So in the textbook, they show you how, and it can be anything. A lot of times we put the sentinel value as a number that we would not expect to get from the user. So if I'm asking you for a number, if you give me a -1, that generally means that's the opposite of what I would expect. So like I wouldn't put my sentinel value as like 5, because 5 is something that we might expect to be a number, okay? And again, this loop is going to continue to process until the user puts in a -1. When that -1 is entered, the loop is over, and it proceeds to the next line of code after the loop body or after the while structure. Okay? Let's go through and see how this runs. So we're going to run this program. I'm going to update my save. And I'm just going to make my shell just a little bit smaller so we can see. Okay, so it's asking me to enter a number. I put in 10. It asks for another number. I put in 10. It asks for another number. I put in 8. Now I'm ready to stop the loop. I put in -1. Okay, so what's going to happen next? Once it reevaluates right here, is the number not -1? Well, when it is, then it's going to stop the loop, and it's going to print the value of the sum variable. Now, when we look at our input, we know that we've added 10 plus 10 plus 8. So every time that this loop comes around, it said sum equals sum plus number. First time it was 10. Sum equals sum plus number. The next time we added 10 more. Now it's 20. Sum equals sum plus number. This time we added 8. Now the value of sum is 28. This goes back to something that we learned in chapters 1 and 2, is that a variable can only hold one value at a time. So this is an example of an accumulator. I don't think that your textbook uses that word a lot, but an accumulator means that we are constantly adding on a number that can vary to a variable, okay? Anytime that we want to add up something or keep track of some type of series of numbers, okay? So when I hit enter, let's see what our result is going to be. So I'm anticipating that the value of sum is going to be 28. And that's what I got, okay? So it actually showed me that the value of the numbers that I put in is 28. Why didn't it add in that -1? Well, think about it. Those two statements right here are only processed as long as that number is not -1. So when -1 is put in, we don't go back through these two statements again. We will not process those again, okay? That's one example. Let's look at something else. I'm going to make a slight change to this. I'm going to delete that code because you may be thinking, well, why do you have the input before the loop and in the loop? So let's watch what happens when we don't repeat that. So basically we would say enter your number while the number is not -1, sum equals sum plus number, and we just want that to keep going around. Well, remember, when the loop processes, it processes line by line. So once it encounters the input, okay, you get the number. While that number is not -1, okay, then add number to sum. It's not going to go back up here and process that input statement again. It's only going to come back here. So if I never have another input to update the value of the loop control variable, then I'm stuck in an infinite loop. So watch this. When I run this program, okay, and it's going to say enter a number. I put in 10. Okay. Well, it has no clue what to do. In some programming languages, your screen would flicker. Okay, you could actually see it flickering. In the Python shell, it does not flicker, but nothing happens. So I'm just hitting enter and nothing is happening. I'm stuck in an infinite loop. Okay, because I'm never updating the value of number. Think about it like this. Let's walk through this again. So sum is set to 0, and I use the input statement to assign a value to number. So I get the number from the user. Let's say I put in 10. While 10 is not -1, that is true. Sum equals sum plus number. Sum is now set to 10. While the number is not -1. Well, the value of number is still 10. That's true. Sum equals sum. Every time I keep cycling through these two lines of code, the value of number is never updating. So it's never going to stop. Okay? That is an infinite loop. This is why it is important. I'm going to close the shell for a moment. That is why this is important for me to make sure that I update the value of my variable. Now, a lot of times, and this is how it works, you prime the loop right before you enter the while statement. A lot of languages and a lot of programming textbook and programmers like to call this statement your priming read, meaning you give the loop control variable its beginning value, and you do that immediately before the while statement. Okay? But then you also have to repeat that input statement so that you can update the value of the variable before that condition is reevaluated. Most of the time, that prime and read is repeated as the last line of your loop body. Okay? Because think about it, where do we go from here? We go right back here to reevaluate the loop condition. So you have to update the loop condition as the last line of the loop body so that when it comes around again to the while statement, the value of number has changed, and you can reevaluate it to determine whether or not the user wants to exit the loop. Okay? So again, I'm going to point out just a couple of lines of code and some terminology for you. This is called a prime and read. We must prime or give the loop control variable its beginning value. That is done outside the loop body, or right before your loop header. Okay? The prime and read and the loop control variable must match. Okay? So I'm trying to give number its beginning value so that I can determine if the loop condition is true. This is my, I say centennial value, but I've heard people call it sentinel value, trailer value. This is what's going to stop my loop. This is what's going to stop my loop. Again, this is the loop control variable. The value of number determines if the loop is going to continue. This is a statement, or essentially it's just an accumulator. Every time this loop comes around, I'm adding on to the value of sum with that loop control variable. Okay, number is being added to sum every time. This is where I repeat my prime and read so that I can give my loop control variable a new value to be determined. Without that, I have an infinite loop because I'm never updating the value of number. Okay. Now, once a -1 is entered and this evaluates to be false, I immediately come down to the next line after my while statement or my while structure, and I process the next line of code. And in this respect, I'm going to print this string. I'm just going to print exactly what's in quotation marks, and then I'm going to print the value of sum. I hope this explanation was helpful to you as you try to understand how a while statement works and a loop that's controlled by the user.